Salvete omnes, laetus vos excipio ad sessionem noam illineatam. That's the best I can come up with for saying an online class. As you know, we've been working for the last 6 weeks discussing Ovid's Echo and Narcissus myth. We've been going off on lots of different tangents, discussing lots of different ways to approach the myth, thinking a lot about rhetoric, style, form, meter, as well as the text in general. And our goal for this presentation is to tie together all of those threads, to tie together all of the tangents that we've gone off on, and finally really return to the big question, the essential question that started all of our discussions, which is all knowledge good? If yes, why? And if not, what knowledge is not good and why? And hopefully after we've watched this, we'll be able to respond online to a number of different prompts, and we'll be able to take our discussion in a number of different directions. That's the goal. Okay? So you can feel free to pause this at any time. If it gets kind of heavy, there will be moments when I might even suggest to take a short emotional break. But in any case, I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you find it fulfilling, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts as a result. Let's begin. When we began Echo and Narcissus, we started looking at the nature of self-knowledge, and we asked the question, by nature, is self-knowledge destructive, or is it a source of enlightenment? And frankly, where does the concept of know thyself come from? If we remember back in Latin 1, that's probably the first time that we ever saw this, even though we weren't addressing it at that time. Do you remember? Apollo quoque est Deus prophetiae. Si quis haberet quaestionem magnam, non numquam visitaret ad oraculum Apollinis, ubi apud Delphos, cur ad quaestionem rogandam, id est ut quaestionem rogaret, et Apollo per oraculum daret responsum visitantibus. Bene? Intelligitisne? Monstrate mihi. Perfectus. Gratias omnibus. Et femina est femina sacerdos nomine Pythia, dabat responsum Apollinis. Now, why is she called the Pythia? We can also recall from one of the stories that we were talking about, the Fabula Apollinis et Cupidinus. In initio fabulae Apollo Deus musicae, Deus medicinae, qui demisit sagittas ex caelo sicut fulmen Iois, right? What did he do? He de volavit ex caelo ut horribilem magnum formidabilem serpentem nomine Puthonem necaret. And that's what we can see him doing here. And we can also read the short epigram at the bottom, which we have discussed before. Immensum certistra vit Puthona sagittis nec meruit minimum Cynthius arte decus, latonae matri monstrum eunonis obiram et terrin festum dum necat atque mari. Of course, the Cynthius referring to Apollo. Apollo lay waste the gigantic python with his sure firing arrows, and indeed he did not deserve any small praise for his skill. Of course, we've reenacted that many times. I think this was the most successful of the city. I'm not quite sure why you're aiming at me. Anyway, yes, because you're the python, doctor. Yes, gratias. That's awesome. Okay. Now looking at the Greek, we can work through this. Gnothi se auton, know thyself, right? There are many examples of this know thyself as perhaps a greeting, perhaps a warning, perhaps both. When it goes into Latin, the gnothi se auton becomes nosce te ipsum, right? Know te ipsum, know thyself, and sometimes te met nosce, which is what we see in the pellicula Matrix, right? Where Keanu or Neo is seeing this when he himself goes to visit the Pythia in many ways, the oraculum. And here's, of course, the passage. Enexast utero pulcherrima pleno infantem nymphae. So, the pulcherrima nymphae enexa est from her utero pleno in infantem. Iam tunc qui posset amari narcissumque vocat, de quo consultus. Now we're talking about Tiresias, the fa didicus vates. Consultus de quo, it is de Narcisso, an esset visurus, tempora longa maturae senectae. The fa didicus vates, Tiresias, said, si se non noerit. And that's where this whole concept of if he doesn't know himself comes from. And so in many ways we're looking at kind of a literary pun here. But as we've talked about, it can be viewed as a lot more than that. What's interesting is this concept of nosce te ipsum, or know thyself, shows up in a lot of unexpected places. For instance, when Carl Linnaeus is actually thinking about the system of taxonomic names in the Systema Naturae, which is the 6th edition in 1748, you can actually see that man, in this case homo, as one of the anthropomorpha, right? We're talking about anything that has a human shape, right? Anthropomorphic. Homo is actually described as nosce te ipsum. It's our ability to recognize ourself. It is self-knowledge. It is self-awareness that distinguishes us from simia, something else which would be anthropomorphic, but not human. And that's one of the, I think in the 18th century, this is one of the key figures to decide what makes us human as opposed to an animal. What is it that separates us from everybody else? And of course we see that from one perspective, Narcissus dies once he knows himself. Of course the prophecy comes true. The prophecy that seemed vana, right, the vox auguris, it seemed vana diu, right, for a longum tempus. And in Narcissus's case, self-knowledge brings ruin. It doesn't bring enlightenment, if anything. But what if that's not really what temet nosce, or nosce te ipsum, really means? What if it's not in fact a piece of advice? What if temet nosce, what if nosce te ipsum is really a salutation of the god? And in the ancient world, we see in Plato's Charmides, we see this idea put out there. Because really, know thyself is only half of what we read at Delphi. There's know thyself, but the other half is medein agan. Ne quid nimis, nothing in excess. Is nothise auton, nosce te ipsum, temet nosce, and medein agan, ne quid nimis, are these in fact the same? Does know thyself then mean be humble before God? Does nothing in excess mean check your pride? Does it mean strike a balance? Does it mean take the middle course? It can, if we think about the fact that the self is required to balance the self. Because then we're not talking about knowing thyself as much as we're really talking about the concept, the Greek concept of sophrosune. This is a big concept. It's one of these many words it's almost impossible to define in English in a single way, right? Words like pietas and words like pudor. It's better if we just keep it as the actual word. A concept of an ideal of excellence of character, soundness of mind, balanced individual. When we have this balance, it can lead to other qualities: moderation, prudence, purity, decorum, self-control, temperance. The Latin word for this is often temperantia, which we can actually see. It is the opposite of hubris, and I think that's the key. We can say that sophrosune and hubris are diametrically opposed, right? And if we actually take a look at temperantia, what is it that she is doing? We have this ignis, right? Kalescit, sub pedibus. But what is she doing? She has her amphora, maybe aperta, fortasse fracta, and aqua effluit ex amphora et extinguit ignem, right? Just as there is fire, there is also water. There is balance in all things. That's what temperance, that's what sophrosune is. And that's, of course, what happens, right, as a result of Narcissus behaving in a way with too much superbia. By having this superbia, by having this hubris, he is completely out of balance. And the moment that someone who has been despectus, someone who's been spretus, tollens their manus ad aethera, makes the prayer. It says, Sic amet ipse licet, sic non potiatur amato. May he never have possession of the thing that he loves. And of course, Rhamnusia. And we're thinking of Rhamnusia, her word, or rather her name, is really nemesis. Hubris brings about nemesis. And of course, the next word is fons. And the fons is what brings about his destruction, right? Fons, pulchritudo, periculum, all in the same place. And so when Narcissus is staring at himself and he comes to know himself, this does bring about his destruction, right? This does bring about his death. His self-enlightenment brings about his death. And why is Ovid pairing Echo and Narcissus? Both of them, perhaps through no fault of their own, just because of who they are, they both have kind of a dura superbia. Narcissus, on one hand, thinking exclusively about the self. Echo, on the other hand, exclusively about others. Again, perhaps through no fault of her own, as a result of trying to be the go-between between yes, you know who, and the nymphs, who saipe sub suo ioe jacebat in montibus, and she would tenebat the deam longo sermone dum nymphae fugeret. And so what is it that she must do? She must live for the other. What is it that Narcissus must do? He must live for the self. Both of them are out of balance. Both of them have no sophrosune. And as a result, both of them are destroyed. And as Narcissus looks at himself long enough, eventually his metamorphosis takes place. And this, of course, we're looking at the Metamorphosis of Narcissus by Dali from 1937, I believe in the Tate Gallery in London, in which he actually begins to stare at himself in the Stygian pool in the waters of the river Styx, and he then has his metamorphosis into a flower. Now, we also discussed the fact that Echo and Narcissus is not the only model for the connection between Scientia and Mors. One of the key places for that is in Genesis chapter 2, beginning with verse 15. Let's look at this together again briefly. Tulit ergo Dominus Deus hominem, et posuit eum in paradiso voluptatis, ut operaretur, et custodiret illum. Bene. Praecepit quae ei dicens ex omni ligno. And ligno is the key word here. Lignum, typically a word for wood. Here it's being used as, well, I won't say really metonymy. It's just being used as another word for arbor. Ex omni ligno paradisi comede. De ligno autem scientiae boni et mali ne comedas. So this is being used as a negative command. Noli comedere. In quocumque enim die comederis ex eo morte morieris. You will die a death. And here's where Adam goes to sleep. Imisit ergo Dominus Deus supporem in Adam, cumque obdor misset, that's obdor miviset. This is one of the contractions that we see in Latin. Tulit, remoit unam de costis eius, et replevit carnem pro ea. Probably better as flesh as opposed to he replaced the beef, right? Et edificavit Dominus Deus costam, quam tulerat de Adam, that's tempore plusquam perfecto de Adam, so which he had taken in mulierem, et adduxit eam ad Adam, et dixit Adam hoc nunc os ex ossibus meis, et caro de carne mea, bone from my bones, flesh from my flesh. Fast forward a little bit, erat autem uterque nudus. Both of them, really, uter can mean both, or really each of two. It's referring to two specifically. Each of two were nudus. Adam scilicet et uxor eus, et non erubescebant. They didn't what? They didn't turn what color? Exactly. They didn't turn red. They didn't blush. Why didn't they blush? Because they haven't learned shame. Why haven't they learned shame? Because they don't know it yet. That's part of the ligno boni et mali. Fast forward a tiny bit to chapter 3. Said et serpens erat calidior. Now the serpens is not hotter a snake, but rather a more clever one. Cunctis, and cunctis is omnibus animantibus terrae, quae fecerat dominus Deus. Qui dixit ad mulierem, cur praecepit vobis Deus ut non comederetis de omni ligno paradisi. And the woman responded to him, qui de fructu lignorum quae sunt in paradiso vescimur. Basically, we can eat. Comedimus. De fructu vero ligni quod est in medio paradisi, praecepit nobis Deus, ne comederemus, et ne tangeremus. So we can't even touch it, right? Ne forte moriamur, lest by chance we will die. Now, dixit autem serpens ad mulierem, nequa quam morte moriemini. Yes, I love this when we think about it in a literal way. You will die not at all a death. For scit Deus quod in quocum die comederitis ex eo, your oculi will be aperientured, and you will eritis sicut di scientes bonum et malum. And I think that's the idea. Your eyes literally will be opened. And the woman saw that it was good. Ad vescendum, id est ad comedendum, et pulchrum tuor oculis, and aspectuque delectabile, and she tulit from its fructu, and she comedit, and she did it to her viro, meaning to Adam, who comedit quoque. And their oculi were aperti sunt. It happens instantly. And what is it that they recognize first? Cumque cognovissent, re cognovissent se esse nudos. The first thing they realize is that they are naked. They consuerunt, they sewed together the folia of a ficus, and they fecerunt sibi perizomata, which would be kind of like a loincloth or some type of an undergarment, a girdle, if you will. Yes, a belt. And I got to say, I love Frankiac because if you check out in Simpsons, you can basically type in almost anything you want in frankiac.com, and it will provide you with the scene and the caption. Of course, the Simpsons Biblical Stories comes from Season 10, Episode 18. And the moment that Adam and Eve, of course, have eaten of this, God returns to the Garden of Eden in Genesis just after, and he sees them, and they said, we were hiding from you when he can't find them. We were hiding from you because we were naked. And he says, who told you that you were naked? And right now they are cast out of paradise. There are many representations beginning in, or even, certainly before the Renaissance, but during the Renaissance and beyond, in which the angel, to my knowledge, Jophiel, casts them out of paradise, where now they will have to labor. And it is this knowledge of all things, both good and evil. Now that they know the knowledge of good and evil, it actually brings not only enlightenment, but it brings incredible suffering for them as well. The Michelangelo version, I think, is also from the Sistine Chapel. I think does an equally incredible job of imparting what's happening, where we have the snake, which in this case actually is a very anthropomorphic snake, handing off the fructus to Eve, and we have the angel again sending Adam and Eve out of the medio paradisi. So back to this big concept of nothi se auton and meden agan. Does know thyself mean be humble before God, nothing in excess, check your pride, strike a balance, take the middle course. The self is required to balance the self. That's just it. There's more than one example of literature, whether ancient or biblical or whatever, that shows us that self-knowledge can in fact, while we often think of that as enlightenment, it can actually bring destruction. So maybe what we're really looking at is a question of being balanced and knowing that we must be humble, knowing that we must balance ourselves. And that takes us back to this big question, is all knowledge good? If yes, why? And if not, what knowledge is not good and why? And I think we can separate this question into possible knowledge versus impossible knowledge. That's, I think, where this gets a little bit more complicated. When we think about impossible knowledge. This is a question that I've posed to my students many times. Si licea tibi scire, quomodo et quando morituris aut moritura sis, velisne noscere, cur an cur non. This is what happens in so many of the oracles in the ancient world. What is going to happen for my child? What will my child's future be? Will they see this longa tempora of a matur senectae? We see this with Oedipus, we see this with Narcissus, we see this with many others. And I've asked my students many years, as I just suggested, if you had the opportunity to know when and how you were going to die, would you want to? Why or why not? And most of my, it's often split 50-50. I'd say that if I had to say over the last 20 years or so, it's really been split kind of down the middle for various reasons. Most people have said that they wouldn't want to know because they would be crippled by that kind of information. Then on the other hand, the people who say I would want to know, they would say I would in many ways be liberated from an irrational fear. If I knew when and how I was going to die, and I knew that I couldn't avoid it, everything else would not be quite as significant because I knew that I would be able to get through it, no matter how terrible, no matter how frustrating, no matter how painful. I would be able to survive, and I would free myself from a fear of death, and in that way I would be bulletproof in many ways. Of course, when we look at other literature, when we even look at the very famous Carpe Diem Ode by Horace, which we've looked at in the past as well, Horace is one of the many people in the ancient world who write about how we ought not to ask this question. Some people, I think, are asking these questions in the oracles, and yet there are many people who are not asking these questions. In fact, the idea, tu ne quae sieris, scire nefas, quem mihi quem tibi, finem dederint, leu conoe, nec Babylonios. The meter here is crazy. I think it's like fifth Asclepiadean. That means literally nothing to anyone who's watching this. Anyway, tu ne quae sieris, basically, you really shouldn't ask. Scire nefas. We can think about how nefas goes into English as words like nefarious. If something is nefas, it is literally unspoken. You shouldn't ask. It is wrong to know what the D, basically what finem the D have dederinted to me and to you. We should not know about our end. We should not attempt the Babylonian numbers. This means we shouldn't use numerology to attempt to figure this out. Ut melius quidquid erit pati. It will be better to endure whatever. Whether Jupiter tribuit, whether Jupiter has attributed, right? Whether he has tribuit pluris hiemes. Whether we're going to see many more winters. Or rather, this is our ultimam hiemem. Fast forward to the end of the ode, dum loquimur, even while we are talking, invida aetas, and we've seen like invidiosa, invita, jealous time has fled. Carpe diem, seize the day, hold on to the day, quam minimum credula postero, and credula, there's our verb, there's our command, place as little faith as possible in the future. Live for the now. Don't ask these kinds of questions. It is wrong to do so. So that's another ancient perspective. Now I think that in many ways, I imagine this is kind of an abrupt picture, forgive me. I was thinking a lot about this question about is all knowledge good and impossible knowledge last year when I went over to my wife's grandmother's house. She lives very close by, and I brought my children. She'd been talking for many days about making a lasagna. And she was saying, you know what, making lasagna is just getting really hard for me. I think this is going to be my last lasagna. And we all kind of said a last lasagna? Like, this is okay. If it's going to be a last lasagna, let's celebrate the fact that it's actually going to be a last lasagna. And so what we did was we got a cake, and we put last lasagna on the cake, and we ate the lasagna, and then we celebrated last lasagna. And I think that in this case, the idea is we all came together at the table, we ate the lasagna, we enjoyed it, we all thought it was delicious, and we all had sort of a tacit understanding that this would be the last time that we would ever eat this meal together. Certainly not the last time we would ever eat lasagna, although maybe. I doubt it, but maybe. But it was going to be the last time that my wife's grandmother was ever going to make lasagna. And we found ourselves to be surprisingly emotional about it, despite the fact that it was in fact a very benign moment. Like, so what if it's a last lasagna? And I think that a lot of these impossible knowledge is really knowing when is the last time that something is going to happen. It doesn't have to be death. It can be something else. In the end, it's all about accepting finality. For instance, when will be the last time that you get a haircut? When's the last time you're going to paint your room? When's the last time you're going to scream? When will the last time be that you borrow a book? Peel an apple, dial a wrong number, I don't know, stay up a little bit too late, text someone after midnight. When will be the last time that you have a nightmare? When will be the last time that you tell someone a bad joke? In my case, it'll be likely be on my deathbed, but that's beside the point. My point is, many of these are benign. It's not something that you would ever think about. But there are other things that we could, and when we do think about these things, it puts it into a different perspective. When is the last time that you are going to visit your favorite place? Is that something that you would want to know? When is the last time that you're going to see your best friend? When's the last time that you're going to hold hands with someone you love? In many ways, these questions really get at the heart of accepting finality. So when we're thinking about impossible knowledge versus possible knowledge, sometimes it's better not to know. Now, this would be a great place to take a break if you are, again, planning on taking a short emotional break at any point. If not, I'm excited to continue as we go really into the third phase of this not impossible knowledge. Is all knowledge good? If yes, why? And if not, what knowledge is not good and why? Great. Let's keep going. So the question of is all knowledge good, and especially we're talking about not impossible knowledge, right? So possible knowledge. Often when I ask my students about this, I find that they struggle a little bit with the question of is all knowledge good, because they'll identify that sometimes when we learn things, that learning can be incredibly painful. It especially applies to relationships. And since I work with teenagers, what I'll do is I'll often say, okay, let's imagine that you are in a steady, committed relationship with someone. You've been in a steady, committed relationship with someone for several months, and maybe even a year, maybe more. And your partner, you don't know this, but your partner once cheated on you. They realized that they had made a mistake. They told that other person that they didn't want to do that kind of thing again. That other person agreed, and they never told you, and you never knew. And it never really affected your relationship because it's something that you didn't know about. You've trusted that person, you've lived with them, you're coming to really like this person. You've been in, like I said, you've been in a committed relationship with them for a while. And the question is, would you want to know? And some people would want to know, and some people wouldn't. Most of the people who wouldn't would want really to protect themselves from the pain, from the discomfort. People who would want to know would say, well, it happened, and love can't live where there's no trust, right? The concept of amor and fides from when we were discussing the fabula Cupidinus et Psyches earlier on in the year. And in the end, there really is no denying that knowledge is often associated with pain. Wisdom arises from suffering. And one of the first places that we see that, why I'm showing you the Mask of Agamemnon, Agamemnon in the Agamemnon of Aeschylus says pathe mathos, right? We're thinking pathe mathos. Essentially, learning takes place through pain. I mean, it's incredibly, incredibly terse two words in Greek that has like a lot of power. Wisdom, sapientia, arises specifically from suffering. Personal experience is a great source of learning. And I don't need to try to prove that to anyone. I just need to remind you, when was the last time that you burned yourself? And you likely will be able to remember specifically where you were and why. Because it was incredibly painful, and now you know how to avoid that kind of pain again. I mean, in terms of psychology, those kinds of memories, etc., they are set in a different place in your brain. Personal experience is often a source of learning, and the wisdom arises from that pain that's associated with our personal experience. And so it's really about that perception. It's about that as a source of learning. So there's no denying that often knowledge and pain are connected, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all possible knowledge is bad. I think a better question is really the question of, is ignorance bliss or is ignorance dangerous? And I'd like to present to you something, the case of Buchenwald. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with Buchenwald. I certainly wasn't familiar with Buchenwald until I traveled to Germany in the year 2000, and I spent about 3-4 weeks there trying to learn some German. I was working towards my PhD at the time. I needed to be good at it, and it was a difficult language, and I really loved my stay. I loved the people. I loved everything about it. And one of the things I availed myself of was taking as many side trips as I could on the weekends to visit a number of historic sites. And so this is an example of that. So as I discuss this, I want you to be thinking about this question of knowledge and pain, and is ignorance bliss, or is ignorance in fact dangerous? I can put it in those terms. So one weekend I was able to travel to a city called Weimar. Weimar, for those of you who don't know, is located in central Germany. It's the birthplace of the Weimar classicism. There are many famous classical German composers, authors, etc., who made it their home. Not only a birthplace of Weimar classicism, but of the Weimar Republic, which essentially, at least to my knowledge, was Germany's government after the abdication of, I can't even remember, is it Bismarck, between 1919 and 1933, which after which time a lot of stoking fears of communism amid a depression really led to the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party. And that's my basic knowledge of everything. But when I was able to go to Weimar, I was really captivated by its beauty. It reminded me a lot of being able to study in some of the most prestigious places in Oxford, the libraries, the homes, a source of incredible wealth, a source of incredible enlightenment and beauty. And I really loved going to the markets outside, especially in the main square, looking at some of the old aristocratic homes and looking at the people who were sort of lively and bustling in the marketplace. Especially because a lot of the stuff was in Japanese, and I was hanging out at the time with a friend of mine because we were both really trying to learn German, and he was from Japan, didn't speak any English, and my Japanese, I think I probably knew how to ask, like, where's the train from Kyoto to Tokyo, and then if someone had told me, I would have like no idea, right? What is it, like Tokyo kana Kyoto mada no densha doko desu ka? That was it. And then that was it. You could tell me anything, and you could tell me like it's located in the toilet, and I'd have no clue. Anyway, Hiroyuki and I, that's the guy's name that I was hanging out with. Hiroyuki and I basically hung out a lot here, and we went all around the markets, and basically he was translating all of the Japanese for me. Anyway, that's really not important to anything I'm about to tell you. I'm just talking. That's what happens. Okay. Now, towards the end of the Second World War, the Allied bombings were continuing, and they bombed Weimar pretty substantially. And there was an incredible amount of destruction. And at this point, one of the a number of the people who were being asked to clear the area were prisoners from a concentration camp, a death camp, a slave camp that was about 5 miles away, somewhere between about 8 kilometers, 4 to 5 miles away. And this camp was called the Buchenwald camp. The Buchenwald camp is one that's maybe not quite as famous or well known as some of the others, Bergen-Belsen or Auschwitz, for example. And yet, if you visit there, it will leave an incredible lasting impression. It'll leave a lasting impression, I'll just leave it at that. When you walk through the gate says in German, jedem das seine. This, in effect, means to each his own. I suppose it's really supposed to mean, in context, everyone gets what they deserve. I'm not sure that's what Cicero had in mind when he wrote it. It seems first, sum cuique pulchrum est. Basically, everyone's own thing is beautiful to them. So I'm not sure if that's really what he had in mind. But these were the words that greeted people in the gates as they would go inside. The view of the crematorium is difficult to appreciate. At one point, there were over 240,000 individuals over the course of many years. To my knowledge, the Buchenwald camp was opened in around 1937. Between 1937 and April of 1945, there were 240,000 people who were imprisoned there, and there were over 50,000 people specifically there who died. When the Allied forces liberated the camp on around April 11th, April 12th, 1945, they were absolutely stunned by what it was that they saw. They began to document it. They began to invite American journalists. They began to ask a lot of people to come and to see this so that no one would forget what had happened. It was really heart-wrenching for the people who were in the U.S. military who were there. A lot of the generals got together and they decided to do something which I don't know if it has been repeated elsewhere, but I know that I know what was done here. Before I get to that, there were reports. Before I get to that, there was a report, a famous one by a famous journalist named Edward R. Murrow, who was a reporter for CBS, and he was there about 3 days after the liberation of the camp in 1945. You can find YouTube videos of him reading it. The audio quality is not fantastic, but I think it certainly doesn't. It's certainly very powerful, nonetheless. The words really speak for themselves. There surged around me an evil-smelling stink. Men and boys reached out to touch me. They were in rags and the remnants of uniforms. Death already had marked many of them, but they were smiling with their eyes. I asked to see one of the barracks. It happened to be occupied by the Czechoslovaks. When I entered, men crowded around, tried to lift me on their shoulders. They were too weak. Many of them could not get out of bed. I was told this building had once stabled 80 horses. There were 1,200 men in it, 5 to a bunk. The stink was beyond all description. They called the doctor. We inspected his records. There were only names in the little black book, nothing more. Nothing about who had been where, what he had done or hoped. Behind the names of those who had died there was a cross. I counted them. They totaled 242. 242 out of 1,200 in 1 month. As we walked out into the courtyard, a man fell dead. 2 others, they must have been over 60, were crawling towards the latrine. I saw it, but will not describe it. Again, the words speak for themselves. So moments ago I referenced that the American generals got together, Patton, Bradley, Eisenhower, and they decided they wanted to do something. And so they forced the civilian population from the city of Weimar, the local Germans, they forced them to march from the city to the site of the Buchenwald camp. They made them look. They made them look at what their government had done. They made them look at what they implicitly had been a part of. And they marched them by one. So many of them said, "We didn't know. We thought that it was propaganda. We didn't know that it was real." And the soldiers said, "How could you not have known? This was happening 5 miles away from where you live in incredible prosperity." Again, it's hard to appreciate the numbers. And then the American soldiers handed all of the citizens of Weimar a shovel. And they said, "You're as much a part of this as your government for your inaction. And you are going to dig the graves." And so they did. So the citizens of Weimar dug trenches, and that's where they buried the bodies. And so in many ways, we can think about how ignorance, is it bliss or is it in fact dangerous? And what's the difference between ignorance and complicity? There are a number of graves and there are a number of memorials to those who died at Buchenwald. And I was moved when I was able to take a look at this one, which has a very small Latin inscription at the end, "Non omnis moriar," which comes again from Horace, perhaps appropriately so. "Non omnis moriar, multaque pars mei vitabit libitinam." I shall not die completely, for a part of me shall essentially live on forever. Literally, it will avoid death, but the idea is it will live on forever. And so I would argue, as we think about, is all knowledge good? I would say yes. And I would say that, is ignorance dangerous? And I would say even more so. And if we look at the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Something I've talked to you about many times is I've advocated for language, and I've advocated for social justice, equity, access to languages, etc., in districts that don't look like ours. I've often said sometimes the most dangerous and irresponsible that we can do as citizens is nothing. Another quote from Martin Luther King Jr. related to the connection between ignorance and complicity and being dangerous. "History will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good." And so here we are. Si se non cognoverit, is all knowledge good? If yes, why? If not, what knowledge is not good and why? I hope this has been provocative for you. I hope that this has been able to make you think a little bit differently about how you feel, put your ideas together, tie in all of the threads and tie in all of the tangents. And I look forward to hearing your responses. Again, this has been Dr. Z. Thank you so much.